Good morning, everyone. To mark World Food Safety Day today, this special edition Breakfast Bite is on starting a food business, what you need to know. I'm Emma, and I'll be your host for the event this morning. So, as we all know, food safety is a shared responsibility, and everyone has a role to play from farm to table to ensure the food we consume is safe and healthy. So, through World Food Safety Day, the World Health Organization works to mainstream food safety in the public agenda and reduce the burden of foodborne diseases globally. The day reminds us all that food safety is everyone's business. So, with this in mind, I'm joined here by my colleagues Niamh Dowling, Kevin Rowland, and Chloe Coen. Niamh, Kevin, and Chloe are food scientists and trained advisors working on the FSAI's advice line and will present the talk this morning. And behind the scenes is Elaine working away to make sure everything runs smoothly for us. So we're delighted you're here online with us this morning. The event will last 40 minutes in total, with 30 minutes for the presentation, followed by 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers. And if you do have any questions for our team, you can pop them in the questions box on your screen, and we'll do our best to get them all at the end. And after the event, we'll email you with all of the resources mentioned during this seminar. And lastly, if you're on social media, please do let us know at #FSAI events. And now I'll hand you over to my colleague Niamh, so enjoy.
Thank you, Emma, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Breakfast Bite today. I'm delighted to be here today alongside my colleagues Kevin and Chloe. And yeah, it's great to see so many people tuned in and looking to find out more about starting a food business. So let's get started then. So I suppose no matter how big or small your business is, it's important that you're aware that you need to comply with the relevant food hygiene legislation. It's your responsibility to produce safe food. So with that, some of the topics that we're going to cover today. So I'm going to run you through registering your food business, and I'll also run you through the relevant food hygiene legislation. Kevin is going to talk you through how to develop your food safety management system, also known as your HACCP system, and he'll also go through your training requirements. Chloe will then talk you through your traceability system and also other specific legislation that may apply, for example, labeling. So just to begin with, we're going to go through some important definitions. So these definitions have been taken from regulation number 178 of 2002. This is on the general food principles of food law. So I suppose, what is a food? So food is any substance or product, whether processed, partially processed or unprocessed, intended to be or reasonably expected to be ingested by humans. Food includes drink, chewing gum, and any substance, including water, intentionally incorporated into the food during its manufacture, preparation, or treatment. And then what is a food business? So a food business is any undertaking, whether for profit or not, and whether public or private, carrying out any of the activities related to any stage of production, processing, and distribution of food. So I suppose the reason that I mention these definitions is because even if you're just selling tea and coffee, you still are considered a food business. And as well, if you're, setting up a free event for people where you're giving out food for free and you're doing this on a quarterly basis, you're still considered a food business. And lastly then, what is a food business operator? So this means the natural or legal persons responsible for ensuring that the requirements of food law are met within the food business under their control. So on to registration. So I suppose the first step is registering with your local competent authority. So we advise that you do this as early as possible in your business development. This registration process is free of charge and it must be done before you start trading. Once you're registered, the authority they'll be your inspectors, but they're also there to give you advice on any specific queries that you may have. If you're looking for the contact details of your local authority, you can find them on our website at www.fsai.ie. It's important to note as well, if you do have any change to any of the activities that you're carrying out, or if you've taken over a food business, you should also still notify your local competent authority as soon as you can. So who to register with? So there's a few different competent authorities that you may need to register with, and this all depends on the nature of the activities that you're carrying out. So the Environmental Health Office of the HSE is one, the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, the Local Authority Veterinary Service, and the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority. So I'm imagining a lot of you on the call today will register with the Environmental Health Office. So that'd be the likes of if you're setting up a cafe or a food stall or a food truck, or if you're operating from home. Then larger manufacturers of meat or dairy and egg producers would register with the Department of Agriculture. Smaller manufacturers of meat would register with the local authority veterinary service. And then if you're processing fish or aquaculture, you'd register then with the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority. So yeah, I suppose tying in with that then, if you handle foods of animal origin, you may be required to be approved. So you may need approval. This is detailed in more detail in Regulation 853 of 2004. This regulation lays down the specific hygiene rules for foods of animal origin. So I suppose, again, it's important that you contact your competent authority, again, as soon as you can, because they can first get you registered and then also get you approved. And then once you've been approved, you'll be given a unique approval number, and this must appear on all of your products. So as you can see here, the identification mark, this is just an example, but it may be something you've noticed, say, when you buy milk or meat products from your local shop. So on to food hygiene legislation. So Regulation 852 of 2004 on the hygiene of foodstuffs. This is a really important regulation, and it applies to all businesses, big or small. It sets out hygiene rules. It also sets out your requirement to register, and it sets out your requirement to have a food safety management system or a HACCP system. Lastly, it also sets out your requirements for training. So Annex 2 of this regulation then sets out some hygiene rules. So for example, it gives you considerations for the layout and design of your premises. In rooms where you're preparing or processing food, it'll give you some requirements in terms of the surfaces, the floors and walls. It also sets out rules for transport, equipment, food waste and water supply. Lastly, the regulation is also very good for giving information on personal hygiene, so the hand wash, so in terms of hand washing or using gloves, also requirements in terms of pest control, temperature control, wrapping and packaging, and also training. Look, I won't get into too much detail on this here now, but I have summarized some key takeaways for you on the next slide. So yeah, so I suppose firstly, I just want to touch on our publication, Safe Food to Go. This is available for download for free from our website. It's now available in 8 different languages, including Ukrainian and Portuguese. And it's a really good training aid to use, but it gives you a good synopsis of food hygiene legislation. So I suppose it's important to note that food poisoning bacteria, it grows between 5 and 63 degrees Celsius. So with that, it's important you keep cold food cold and you keep your hot food hot above 63 degrees. You should wash your hands frequently and don't cross-contaminate and keep raw and cooked foods separate. You should operate a clean as you go policy and you should use reputable suppliers. Have a good workflow in order to reduce your risks and also train your staff. So now I'm going to pass you over to my colleague Kevin, who's going to talk you through HACCP and training.
Thanks, Niamh. Hello, everyone. So yeah, I'm just going to go over kind of fairly briefly, just provide some information on food safety management systems using HACCP and some information on training. So what is HACCP? So basically every food business needs some sort of food safety management system. And a HACCP system is kind of one method of controlling hazards in your business. So HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. So I'll explain what that means in a moment. So the food safety management system, it allows you to identify risks and hazards put a system in place to control them, and develop a plan of action for when things go wrong. So you'll have corrective actions to fix any issues. So there are 7 so-called principles of HACCP. So these are what you use to kind of create your system if you're creating your own HACCP system. So step 1 is you identify what can go wrong. So these are the hazards. And what is a hazard? So a hazard would be anything that, if it's present in your food, would be a big issue. So you'd have hazards such as physical hazards, so pieces of metal, pieces of glass, insects landing in the food. A hazard could also be a chemical hazard, such as a cleaning agent getting into your food, or a pesticide that shouldn't be there. And you can have biological hazards, so food poisoning bacteria such as salmonella. Another hazard would also be allergens. So allergens need to be very carefully controlled in businesses. So step 2 in the HACCP principle is you identify the most important point where something can go wrong. This would be called the critical control point. So a very easy example here, which is applicable to a lot of businesses, is a cooking step. So step 3, once you've identified an important step, step 3 is you set a critical limit at each critical control point. For a cooking step, it's quite straightforward. It's a time and temperature combination. So you'd set a certain time temperature combination, or just a temperature temperature that you need to reach to produce the food safely. Step 4 would be you'd have to have a verification system in place for this. So again, for the cooking, the cooking step is quite straightforward. Again, you would use a temperature probe to check your food, to check if it has reached, like we say here, 75 degrees, instantaneous 75 degrees Celsius. Step 5 in the HACCP principle will be a corrective action. So what do you do if in this case, you check your food with the probe, hasn't reached temperature? Fairly straightforward. Keep cooking it for longer. A different CCP could be something like metal detection in your food. And then you'd have a corrective action if your metal detector goes off, and you'd have to fix the situation. So, but that cooking example is quite straightforward. Step 6 is that you have to prove that the system's working. You don't just setting up a HACCP system like this. It's not just a tick the box exercise. It's not just something that you create on the first day of your food business and then you put it in a closet somewhere. You need to constantly be reviewing it and checking it to make sure that it's actually being effective. Step 7, which is one of the most important ones, is keeping the documentation and records of everything, because that's your proof. That's the proof that you can show to your inspector that your food business is producing safe food. So here is an example taken from the FSAI's Safe Catering Pack. The Safe Catering Pack is basically an off-the-shelf HACCP system that you can buy that can be used for different types of businesses, mostly I suppose on the smaller scale of things, but you can use it in a restaurant. So here's an example. So we have the hazards, so survival of food poisoning bacteria if the food's not properly cooked. What can you do about this? So this is setting your limit. Cook to 75 degrees or more. And then this is your verification step. Check the core temperature of the food with your probe. And then a very important part of this step is to record the temperature, whether it's high or low, record it, and then you can record your corrective action, take your corrective action, and record that as well once you've done that. So that's an example of just how it can be quite straightforward to do this. However, you don't always need to apply the full HACCP principles. So not every business is equal. So we say here, risk assess your business and decide how best to control hazards, and then decide on one of these options. So we say for low risk businesses, an example of that would be maybe a coffee stand selling tea and coffee maybe some pre-packed chocolate bars, snack bars. You're not really doing anything risky there. You can control your hazards by complying with the basic hygiene prerequisites. And you've actually mentioned those earlier. They're in Regulation 852 of 2004, the hygiene regulation. Annex 2 gives the details of all of, like, it kind of gives basic hygiene standards. So if you're a low risk business, if you comply with all the information that's in that regulation, you're doing more than enough to control the hazards because your risk is low. Another option for you is to use an established standard. So we give the example of the FSAI hygiene standards. So they're nationally recognized standards for good practice in the food business. So those are very detailed, much more detailed than the 852/2004 regulation. So if you comply with everything in the NSAI guides, then you're doing more than enough. You're doing, because that contains legal requirements and it also gives you best practice information. So if you just comply with one of those standards, basically you're set. And then the third option is to apply the 7 principles of HACCP that I mentioned and create your own HACCP system based specifically on your own business. I have here on the page Guidance Note 11 produced by the FSAI, which is the assessment of HACCP compliance. So that's worth checking out whether you're a business or you're an inspector as well. They would often use the same guidance note. So that gives you a bit more detail on the hygiene prerequisites and the standards, the NSAI standards. So you can use that guidance note to check whether you actually are compliant. So again, as Niamh mentioned, kind of similar information earlier here, but the hygiene prerequisites. So the examples are given here. They're laid out in the legislation are like your premises layout and design. So that gives you some information about food contact surfaces and even the walls of your business, the walls, the surfaces, ventilation, lighting, that sort of thing, cleaning schedules, supplier control, procedures to prevent contamination, pest control, and clear work instructions or clear workflow. So if you meet a lot of those kind of examples, and there's other examples in the legislation, if you meet those for a small business, low risk, you will be compliant with legislation. And then just a note here, there should be ownership of your system, your HACCP system, whatever food safety management system you're using. It's not just something that you do to kind of keep the inspector happy. It should be constantly reviewed, tested, and updated. Somebody should be in charge of it, like the supervisor, manager, owner of the business, and they should regularly take a look at it, because especially if you decide, for example, you're in a cafe or some small shop selling only prepackaged foods, suddenly you want to start selling hot foods, you can't just start doing that. You have to reflect that in your food safety management system, because it's a massive change. And all staff should be aware of their role in making the system work. So regardless of whether it's the manager or owner or supervisor who's actually dealing with the HACCP system, everybody, all the staff, like a cooking staff, somebody who's working in the kitchen and cooking the food, they're in a very important part in that system. So they need to be aware of the entire system. Now I'll just go through a little bit about training and your kind of legal requirements as a business. So what are the legal requirements? So these are specified in Regulation 852 of 2004, the same one that has the hygiene prerequisites. In that legislation, it states that food business operators must ensure that food handlers are supervised and instructed and/or trained in food hygiene matters commensurate with their work activity. So what does that mean? Basically, it means you need to be, for the training side of it, it means you need to be trained up to the level of the work you're carrying out. So if you're, again, the head chef will be trained to a higher standard than the person who is just washing the dishes in the kitchen. Two different jobs, you need 2 different levels of food safety training. It also says food handlers are supervised and instructed and/or trained. So legally, you can supervise and instruct your staff rather than train them. However, that only really is useful for a very, very small business. I think it's not really realistic to only supervise staff if you are in a busy restaurant kitchen and you don't train your staff, you just supervise them and instruct them. The odds of something going wrong are a lot higher than if you just provide them with some training. However, if you are a small, let's say you have a stall at a farmer's market that you go to every Saturday morning, and it's just yourself, it's just you at the stall, you decide that you need an extra pair of hands, you get a friend to come in with and help out selling your product. If you have one other person, you could probably get away with just, if you supervise them closely and instruct them, and it's a relatively low risk activity, they're not going to need an entire training course in food safety. So you can get away with it in that way, but it's not really, it's completely unrealistic for any business with more than a few members of staff. Really, you have to prove to your inspector that you're supervising them and it's actually working. So it I think it's hard to prove that, to be honest. And again, here it says those responsible for the development and maintenance of the food business HACCP system must have received adequate training in the application of the HACCP principles. So that's just common sense. If you're the one who set up the HACCP system, you need to be trained in HACCP, otherwise your HACCP system probably has a few problems with it. And how can you meet your food safety requirements? So this is what I was kind of touching on with the supervision versus training. You might think, oh, I'd rather supervise my staff because I don't want to pay for food safety training. But you don't have to pay for food safety training. There's many methods many training methods to train your staff. So we just give some examples here. You can recruit a food safety trainer. So get a food safety trainer to come onto your site and they can give you specific training based around your environment. You could attend the course, so you can go to a food safety training company, like a kind of classroom-based learning. You can avail of e-learning programs, so there's lots of options out there for online food safety training courses. And again, you can also DIY, do it yourself. If you are the manager of a food business or you have tons of experience in a food business, you can train your own staff. Train your own staff, it doesn't cost any money. But again, you would need a solid background in training. Like you need to kind of know what you talked about. You need to have experience in training other people, teaching other people. But yeah, you can do that completely yourself. And then you can also use the FSAI's training guides to help you, and our e-learning modules as well to help train your staff. So lastly here, I just have these are pictures of the FSAI training guides. So we have levels 1 and 2 in the one booklet. So level one would be like a brand new member of staff in a food business. These are the skills that they need on the first day. Level 2 would be maybe the staff member has been there for a longer period of time. These are the kind of slightly more advanced skills and knowledge that they would need. Then we have the Guide to Food Safety Training Level 3. So this is skills for management, skills for supervisors. These would be kind of skills for the people who are, like I mentioned earlier, more responsible for the HACCP system and creating the HACCP system. These are the skills that will be applicable to them. So that's just a brief overview there of some HACCP and training information. So now I'm going to pass you over to my colleague Chloe, who will be going into details on traceability and food labeling.
Thank you, Kevin. So I'm going to talk through now the importance of traceability within your food business. Sorry, now my screen. So it's a legal requirement to have a traceability system in place, and at a minimum, you must be able to trace back one step forward and one step back. And you'd also need to identify what details you need to include in your traceability. So we would always say that it's best to keep as much information as possible. There's also specific requirements for sprouted seeds and foods of animal origin, and we'll get into this in a bit more detail in a moment. So for the traceability information and records, the legislation prescribes 4 pieces of information that you must keep. So that's the name and address of the supplier or customer, the nature of products supplied, the date of each transaction or delivery. So in general, the records should be kept until food can be reasonably assumed to have been eaten. And then for sprouted seeds, as I mentioned, there's a little bit more detail that's required. So you should keep your information updated daily and until the food can be reasonably assumed to have been eaten. And likewise with food of animal origin, the information must be updated daily and kept for at least 3 years. So why is traceability so important? So we know that even the best manned food businesses can face a food safety issue, but if something goes wrong with a food product you've supplied, an up-to-date and detailed traceability system will allow for a speedy identification of the problem. It'll also permit a quick recall or withdrawal of affected product if necessary, and it'll minimize the risk to the consumer. It'll also minimize reputational and financial damage to the food business. So to comply with the legislation, you'll also need to have a recall and withdrawal system in place. So a recall is the removal of unsafe food from the market when it has reached the consumer. And in this case, you'll have to ensure that the consumer is notified. And a withdrawal is the removal of unsafe food from the market before it has reached the consumer. So what is your responsibility? So it's the food business's responsibility to ensure that unsafe or non-compliant food is removed from the market. You're legally required to notify your competent authority and cooperate with them. You must also notify any other food business operator that has been affected. And you should also establish a system so you know what to do and who to contact, and ensure that the system is always kept up to date. So I'm now going to talk through some other legislation that you'll need to consider. So I'm going to briefly touch on the labelling legislation, which is regulation number 1169 of 2011 on the provision of food information to the consumer. And we also refer to this as FIC. So what this legislation covers is what must appear on your label and what information must be provided to the consumer about the food. It also goes through the allergen declaration requirements and the nutritional labelling requirements. It also sets out the minimum font size and the requirements for packaged and loose food. So there are 12 different things that are mandatory to be labelled on pre-packed food. So I have them listed on the screen here. So I just want to draw your attention to numbers 1 and 5, which is the name of the food and the net weight or volume. So both of these must appear in the same field of vision. So what this means is when a consumer picks up the food product, both of these must appear in the same view on the same side of the packaging. So along with the labelling legislation, there is some product-specific legislation that you need to be aware of. For example, with chocolate, there is product-specific legislation. So along with the labelling, you need to ensure that you're aware of the provisions within this product-specific legislation. I'm not going to go into too much detail on these because it is available on the FSAI website if you want further details on it. So I'm going to talk through the allergens now. So as you are probably aware, there are 14 allergens that must be identified on a food product. So I have them listed here, and these include the likes of cereal, crustacean, eggs, fish, etc. But I just want to draw your attention to the top 2 columns there, the top 2 foods listed in those columns, which is cereals containing gluten and nuts. So for these specific foods, it's you must specify the type of cereal and the type of nut on the product. So for example, if your product contains cashew, you'll need to list the cashew and not just nuts. So then how do we display allergens? This depends whether your food is pre-packed or non-pre-packed. But for pre-packed food, we have an example here at the top in the green box. So this is an ingredient declaration on a pre-packed food. So as you'll see here, the allergens are highlighted in bold so that they are emphasized to the consumer. And if there is no list of ingredients on your product, you can simply state contains followed by the allergen. And for non-pre-packed foods, this would be the likes of in a restaurant, you must declare the allergens in writing. It must also be clear, legible and easy to find. So a consumer must not have to ask for it. It must be in an obvious place to them. So you'll see some more examples here. The first one is a menu, and you can see the allergens are highlighted underneath each menu item. So it's clear which item contains what allergens. And beside this, we have a board that could be displayed at a farmer's market. And you'll see again that the allergens are displayed next to the food. So this will be situated right next to the food. So I'm going to go through some considerations when operating from home or a mobile unit or food stall now. So I'll start with the home, as there are certain pitfalls that you need to be aware of as you're entering into a really highly regulated area, and it's very different to just cooking in your domestic home, as it can bring some risks. So Niamh has touched on this already, but the first thing that you must do is to contact your competent authority straight away and discuss feasibility, because your home environment may not be suitable for some activities, and it's here where they'll organise an inspection to your home and you can discuss what changes or requirements may be needed with the inspector. Your kitchen may not be suitable for the type or volume of food to produce, so that's something that you need to consider. And as always, you need to keep your domestic and business activities separate. So as I mentioned, working or producing food from your home business, it can bring some risks, and some of the main contaminations can occur due to normal domestic activities or poor hygiene, such as infrequently washing your hands or using dirty tea towels, etc., working when ill, changing or feeding babies in the food preparation area, people or pets entering the food preparation area, or your facilities being too small. So it's important that you have controls in place to mitigate these risks. And some other considerations are that production could be too much food for the size of the area, so you may outgrow your home business. There may be insufficient space. So for example, a refrigerator, when you're working with high risk food, you'd need to have a separate refrigerator. A lack of equipment, for example, when you need to cool down the food after cooking, or the type of food may be too high risk to take place in your domestic kitchen. So we're just going to move on to food stalls now. And again, you would need to register with the Environmental Health Office of the HSE, and you should register with the office where your food stall will be normally kept. And the legislation that you'll need to comply with is Regulation A52 of 2004. This is the hygiene legislation, and it goes through the requirements in terms of training, food safety management system, traceability systems, and recall procedures. So we have a guidance note on our website, which is guidance note 16 on food stalls, and it goes through all the general conditions that are outlined in Regulation A52 2004. And yeah, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail. Niamh kind of touched on it again, but this is a good guidance note to make yourself aware of. And as I said, it's available from the publication section of our website. So here we have some more publications. Again, they're available on our website, and in particular, we'd also recommend you go to the business advice section of the FSAI website, because in there we have a specific section dedicated to starting a food business. And lastly then, there are some various ways that you can contact us if you have any further queries. So you can email us at info@fsai.ie. Or on our website, we also have a contact us form where you can submit any queries, and we're also on social media. So lastly, I just want to say thank you for your attention, and I'm going to pass you back to Emma now, who will go through some questions that were asked throughout the presentation.
I think you're on mute, Maria.
Sorry, thanks, Kevin. Sorry about that. Thank you. Sorry, I was just saying thanks very much to Chloe, Niamh and Kevin for the talk this morning. And thank you for all of your questions coming in. So I'll get to them now. If we don't get to every single one of them, you can email us at info@fsai.ie and we'll get back to you. So just going through, oh, here's one here. Niamh, I think this is probably maybe for you. But you can let me know if I'm wrong and pass it on. I have a restaurant and I want to operate as a takeaway. Is there anything I need to do specifically?
Yeah, so I suppose the main thing there would just be to notify your local authority or your local environmental health office. Just notify them of the change of activity and then they'll be able to risk assess you. Yeah, it's important that they've all the up-to-date details on file.
Okay, great. Thanks, Niamh. Actually, Niamh, this might be another one. Sorry, I'm coming to you again. And it's actually something we covered in our last breakfast bite. And I know we have a recording on this on YouTube. If the person who asked this question would like to check it out, we can put a link up in the chat. So can I do my own pest control or do I have to hire a contractor?
Yeah, I can answer that question. So yeah, we did do a recent breakfast bite on pest control, so I would definitely recommend whoever asked that question definitely have a look at it. It goes through pest control and a lot of details. So, but yeah, I suppose you can do your own pest control if you like. There's a lot to it. You need a lot of it requires a lot of time, first of all. So I suppose, would it be feasible? I'm not sure. You'd also need a lot of training and knowledge and skills there as well. So what I would advise is maybe have a look at our breakfast bite. You'll see how much is involved and then you can consider your options. But yeah, I suppose it might be easier just to hire a contractor.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Niamh. Chloe, I'm going to come to you with the next one, and I know this is a really, really popular one when it comes to queries into the advice line. It's always a hot topic. So I'm setting up a takeaway business. How should allergen information be displayed?
Perfect. Yeah. So the main thing is that the allergens must be displayed at the point of sale. So be it on a menu or just as well if you're ordering online, if you're ordering from an app, it must be there before the consumer is purchasing. So the main thing is that it's displayed at the point of sale and in English.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Chloe. And I know we've a really useful section on our website as well dedicated to allergens, so we can share that with you as well. Okay, I'll just have another little look through them here. Okay, Kevin. Again, this is a really popular one that comes into the advice line on a regular basis. Does the FSAI have a list of registered food safety trainers that you can recommend? I'm not sure if this is something that we can do, but maybe Kevin, you can talk more on that.
Yeah, so short answer is no, we don't. Basically, there's no certification body in Ireland for food safety trainers. So it really is just a matter of trying to find like a reputable trainer, like kind of look for reviews, look for, if you have contacts in the food industry, look who they use as a trainer. But there's no certification body, and there's no like list of authorized trainers, because kind of anyone with a food safety background, a good background in teaching and food safety knowledge can be a trainer. So there's no kind of certification process.
Okay, and again, just with training, we've another section on the website dedicated to that, and lots of resources actually on training, so we can share those with you as well. Okay, Chloe, one just popped out here. It's it's specific, but I think it could apply when it comes to other languages as well. So I'm setting up a small coffee shop, and one of my staff speaks Portuguese. So how can I train them?
Yeah, so as Kevin mentioned, you may not always need to take a food safety training course. It might be enough, as we said, to use our guides on our website, but we would always say as well that depends on the experience and your general knowledge of food. But we do have a training guide on our website, Safe Food to Go, and it has recently been translated into 8 different languages. So that could be a useful one to take a look at. Yeah, so that's that one.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Chloe. Niamh, I have one here for you, and I feel like it's a bit of a myth buster one.
Okay.
I've seen it quite a bit. So, is it a legal requirement to use gloves when handling food?
It's actually not a legal requirement. We actually receive that query a lot to the advice line, but no, it's not a legal requirement. So long as you're following, proper and adequate hand washing procedures, there should be no need to wear gloves. If you do choose to wear gloves, it's important that I suppose your hands are clean going into the gloves, and that you change them frequently. Gloves can still be as much of a contaminant as dirty hands. So yeah, changing them frequently if you do choose to use them, but they're not legally required.
Okay, great. I have another query in here from a caterer. Maybe Kevin or Chloe, you can let me know. What temperature should I keep hot food at that is not being served immediately?
I can answer that then. Yeah.
Thanks.
For hot holding of food, if you're keeping something like in a buffet setting or something like that, you need to keep food like once it's cooked over 75 degrees or something like that. Then if you're keeping it hot, it needs to be kept above 63 because I think Niamh mentioned earlier in the presentation the danger zone for most bacteria is between 5 degrees, above 5 degrees, and kind of between and below 63 degrees. So you're just kind of trying to keep it in the spot where the bacteria will not grow. So above 63 degrees is the answer there, yeah.
Great. Okay, thanks, Kevin. I think we have time now for just one more question, and I'll leave it up to you, whoever wants to answer this one. Where can I check the specific requirements my kitchen should comply with if I'm operating from home? So who would like to take that one?
I can take that one.
Thanks.
So we actually have a section on our website dedicated to starting a food business, and we have lots of publications in there specific to starting a food business, and there's a lot of publications as well aimed towards smaller kind of businesses. So I'd recommend going there. But also when you are registering your business, your inspector will make an appointment to call out and take a look at your kitchen. So it's there as well where they'll be able to advise on any requirements or changes that may be needed. So yeah, I'd always recommend getting in contact with your local environmental health officer.
Great, thanks very much for that, Chloe. And also thanks to everyone for their questions and to Niamh, Kevin and Chloe for their answers. And apologies to those of you who sent questions in that we didn't get to, but please email your question to info@fsai.ie and we'll get back to you. So on behalf of the entire team, I'd like to extend a warm thank you to all of you for joining our webinar. So we know that starting a food business can be a really challenging journey, and we appreciate your interest in learning more about the strategies and insights to make your venture thrive. So we hope that the information shared during this webinar this morning will provide valuable input in shaping your path forward. So remember, the food safety industry is ever evolving, and staying informed and adaptable is crucial to staying ahead. If you have any further questions or require additional support, please check out our dedicated business startup section on our website, or again, reach out to us. So just to flag with you that the FSAI hosts a number of free events for small food businesses throughout the year. And you can subscribe to our event alerts, fsai.ie/subscribe, and we can pop a link in the chat and in the follow-up email afterwards as well. So as soon as an event goes up, you'll receive a notification and you can register. So after this event, a survey will launch, and we really appreciate your feedback. It'll help us create future events suited to your needs. Thanks again so much to our food scientists, Niamh, Kevin and Chloe for speaking, and also a huge thanks to Elaine behind the scenes. And again, thank you to all of you for joining us. And finally, we wish you the very best with your food business venture, and may your food business flourish and bring delight to many customers. Thanks again.